Welcome back to our familiar broadcasting slot today, with a dramatic story titled, After My Husband Had an Affair, I Forbade Him from Touching Me, but when I went for a routine health check, the doctor said something that made me faint. On the spot. And if you find that this story touches your heart, please leave a Bake's Daughter. Like for Untold Stories, share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on any great news stories every day. In the corridor of the private medical center in Chelsea, I sat on a pale blue, plastic chair, both hands clutching my health checkup file on my lap. Richard sat beside me, his crisp shirt neatly tucked into his tailored trousers, his hand resting casually on the back of my chair. His demeanor was as measured and composed as always, a man in his early 50s, with silver hair touching his temples, yet his face retained a calm, distinguished charm. Anyone looking at him would think he was a decent, educated man who took excellent care of his family. He tilted his head to look at me, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret, after this is done, let's pop into the pub at the end of the high street for some fish and chips. You haven't eaten a thing all morning. Your blood sugar might drop. I turned to look at him. His eyes held a few laugh lines, the corners of his mouth slightly turned up. For 20 years, I had relied on that gentle facade. I believed in it as surely as I believed the sun would rise every morning, believing to the point that I forgot how the most familiar things are, often the easiest to blind you. I nodded and replied softly, "Yes, we'll see after the appointment." In recent years, I had often felt fatigued. My sleep was fitful, and my body fluctuated between hot and cold flushes. Richard said that at my age, every woman goes through this. The menopause was approaching, and I shouldn't overthink it. I believed him. My whole life, it seemed, I had grown accustomed to believing him. At that moment, my name appeared on the screen. Margaret Evans, room 3. Richard stood up first, reaching out to support my elbow. He did it so naturally, like a model husband who always knew how to care for his wife in public. I let him support me, following him into the consultation room. Dr. Sterling sat behind his desk. He was a slender man in his 50s with silver-rimmed glasses. In front of him was a computer monitor and a stack of test results. He looked up at me, then glanced at Richard. The look was fleeting, but I still caught a momentary hesitation in it. "Please take a seat, Mrs. Evans." I sat down on the chair opposite him. Richard stood behind me, his hands resting lightly on my shoulders. His palms were warm, but for some reason, at that moment, they felt burdensome. Perhaps it was because the air conditioning in the clinic was too fierce, or perhaps because Dr. Sterling kept staring at my results for far too long. He turned another page, tapped his pen against a few lines of data, and then asked, "Me, Mrs. Evans, before the examination, you stated on your form that you and your husband have not been sexually active for a long time, is that correct?" I froze for a few seconds, a lump forming in my throat, even though I had written it truthfully on my medical history form. Hearing the doctor say it so bluntly in front of Richard made my face burn. To outsiders, it was a difficult subject to broach. To me, it wasn't just about marital intimacy. It was an old scar I had kept hidden beneath my clothes for 20 years. Richard's grip on my shoulders tightened slightly. "Yes, that's correct. It's due to some long-standing health issues on my end." Dr. Sterling looked at him. "Are you sure?" I could clearly hear Richard's breathing hitch behind me. The doctor turned back to me, his voice slower and more serious. "In your endocrine test results, there are signs of long-term use of hormone-based contraceptives or similar endocrine drugs, and not just take an occasional pill. I need to ask again to rule out the possibility that you are on some prescribed medication but forgot to declare it." My ears started ringing. I looked at the doctor, then down at the papers on the desk. The medical jargon crowded the page, all of it foreign to me. I only processed the words, "long-term use of hormone-based contraceptives." "What did you say, doctor?" I asked, my voice so faint it sounded alien even to myself. "Contraceptives, or perhaps an endocrine medication with similar active ingredients," Dr. Sterling explained. "I haven't pinpointed the exact source yet, but these indices are highly abnormal." "Do you take any hormone-regulating pills, sleeping drafts, or supplements, either prescribed or over the counter?" I shook my head. The hands resting on my shoulders went rigid as wood. 20 years without a sex life. 20 years where I didn't need, nor had any reason, to take such medication. What I called sacrifice. What I called pitying my lation. Ailing husband. What I called living together like siblings to preserve our Rosas. Vows. Everything was suddenly punctured by the doctor's words. The years I had deemed myself noble were suddenly ripped open, exposing a dark, sinister lining I had never dared to look at. Richard let out a dry laugh. Doctor, there must be some mistake. My wife doesn't take any of those things. Besides, as we've said, we haven't been intimate for a very long time. Dr. Sterling frowned slightly. I understand. That is exactly why I'm asking. Thoroughly. These samples have unique barcodes. Our protocols here are exceedingly strict. If you have doubts, you can have the tests redone elsewhere. But I strongly advise Mrs. Evans to investigate further. Improper long-term use of hormones can severely affect the liver, blood pressure, and blood clotting. Protocols can be strict and still fail, can't they? Richard's voice suddenly rose. I started. I had never seen him raise his voice at a doctor or a stranger like that. Richard always maintained a polite, refined image. Even when displeased, he would just offer a tight smile. Yet at that moment, his face was ashen, his eyes revealing a panic he couldn't hide fast enough. Please calm down, sir, Dr. Sterling said. How can I be calm? Richard took a step forward, grabbing my shoulder to pull me up. My wife is perfectly healthy. What you're insinuating is an insult to our family. What contraceptives? I think I know how we've lived for the past 20 years. I was yanked up so forcefully that my knee slammed into the desk leg. A sharp pain shot through it, but I made no sound. My eyes were still glued to the test. Results on the desk. Dr. Sterling placed a hand on the file, his voice striving to remain professional. You may take a copy with you. I am merely fulfilling my medical duty. Richard snatched the papers from my hand, stuffing them hastily into the envelope. We don't need them. Come on, Margaret, we're leaving. This place is utterly incompetent. Richard. I had barely called his name when he dragged me towards the door. His fingers gripped my wrist so tightly that my old silver bangle bit painfully into my skin. The corridor outside was bustling. Curious eyes darted our way. I kept my head down, following him, hearing my flats slapping against the linoleum. Behind us, Dr. Sterling's voice remained steady. Mrs. Evans, please. Get retested. Do not ignore this. The clinic door clicked shut behind me. All the way from the third floor down to the car park, Richard didn't stop talking. He claimed doctors nowadays love scaring patients. He said private clinics invent illnesses to sell expensive treatment packages. He told me not to take it to heart, that a good rest at home would sort me out. Every word he spoke was perfectly rounded and logical, just like the countless times he managed trivial household issues. But this time, his words offered no comfort. They were like a hasty coat of fresh paint over a cracked wall. The more you cover it, the more glaring the plaslitters the crack becomes. Reaching the car, he opened the passenger door for me. The sun outside was glaring, yet my back felt ice cold. I got into the car, fastened my seatbelt, and stared straight through the windscreen. Richard got into the driver's seat, slamming his door harder than usual. The space inside the car instantly became stifling. The smell of the leather seats, his subtle, expensive aftershave, and the scent of medical paper from the envelope all mingled together, making me want to retch. Margaret, listen to me, he said, starting the engine, his tone softening. Don't let your imagination run wild. It's definitely a mix-up. At worst, we'll go to a different hospital in a few days to double-check. I didn't answer. You know how it is. For 20 years, out of fear of harming you, He hesitated, then sighed. That situation has been hard enough on you. I don't want you getting upset over some absolute rubbish. I turned to look out the window. The traffic in London was crawling, bumper to bumper on the baking tarmac. A woman waiting to cross the road walked past. A child sat behind her on a bicycle, hugging her waist, resting his head on her back. That entirely ordinary image made my heart ache. For 20 years, I had lived as an undemanding wife. I cooked, did the laundry, managed his medications, and tended to his every meal and sleep. I told myself that physical intimacy wasn't as important as devotion. I told myself that he was suffering enough with his condition, and as his wife, I had to be compassionate. There were lonely nights listening to the rain drumming on the placens, slate roof of our conservatory where I felt immense self-pity. But I only had to recall his face, kneeling before me all those years ago, tears streaming down. His cheeks and my heart would soften. But Dr. Sterling's words kept echoing in my mind. Long-term use, not just Anne. Occasional pill. Do you take any supplements? Richard kept talking, faster and faster, as if terrified that a single second of silence would allow something monstrous to crawl out from the gap between us. Meanwhile, for the first time in 20 years, I began to vividly recall that rainy night. The night Richard knelt before me, clinging to my legs, crying until his voice went hoarse, telling me he had contracted an infectious disease. 20 years ago, it was also an afternoon of torrential rain. Oliver was still in primary school. I was young, my hair falling to my mid-back, my hands always busy juggling work and the household. Richard was in a phase where he was being considered for a promotion at his corporate firm. He often came home late. I never suspected a thing. When a woman trusts her husband, she unconsciously bends every excuse to make it sound reasonable. That night, the rain was so heavy that water poured from the gutters in thick, white sheets. I had finished cooking a traditional lamb stew. The dinner sat on the table from 7 p.m. until nearly 10 p.m., untouched. Oliver had fallen asleep on the sofa, clutching a comic book. I carried my son to bed, and just as I turned back, I heard the rattle of keys in the front door. Richard walked in, completely drenched. His shirt clung to his back, his hair plastered to his forehead, his face deathly pale. I rushed to fetch a towel. "What happened to you? Why didn't you call me to bring out an umbrella?" He didn't answer. His eyes were bloodshot, his lips trembling. I thought he had a fever and reached out to touch his forehead, but he suddenly flinched back as, "If I were covered in thorns, don't touch me." That sentence stopped me dead in my tracks. Amidst the sound of rain battering our roof, Richard slowly sank to his knees on the wooden floor. His knees hit the boards with a loud thud. Panicked, I lunged forward to pull him up, but he gripped my hands tightly, tears spilling over. "Margaret, I've wronged you." I had never seen him cry like that. A man who was always composed, who always knew what to say and do, was weeping like a child backed into a corner. He told me he had been set up during a corporate dinner in Soho. He said that while he was drunk, someone took him to a sordid place. He only realized what had happened when he woke up. Later, medical tests revealed he had contracted a disease that could be transmitted to his wife. Every word dropped amidst the sound of the rain. Hearing it tore my insides apart. He bowed his head, his voice raspy. "I didn't dare tell anyone, and I certainly didn't dare touch you anymore. If you want a divorce, I'll sign the papers immediately. I won't blame you. I've ruined your life." I remember exactly what I did next. I didn't slap him, didn't scream at him, didn't walk out. I slumped down in front of him, hugged his cold, wet shoulders, and cried. I cried out of pity, out of fear, thinking my husband would be crushed for the rest of his life by a filthy disaster. The word betrayal didn't even enter my mind. He said he was set up, and I believed him. He said he didn't want to hurt me, and I believed that too. Women can be strange. Sometimes, seeing the man they love in agony makes them forget to ask where the wound came from. From that night on, we slept in separate bedrooms. Richard moved into the small guest room next to the study. I told him it was fine, as long as we still loved each other. We could make any arrangement work. He looked at me with tearful gratitude. After that, he treated me even better than before. His entire salary went into the joint account. He consulted me on all major household decisions, and wherever we went, he introduced me as his devoted, long-suffering wife. In front of relatives, he always gave me the best slice of roast, pulled out my chair, and reminded me to wear a warm coat. Everyone said I was blessed. I used to think so too. Perhaps God had taken away our physical intimacy, but compensated me with a profoundly loyal man. For years, I leaned on that thought to get through the long nights. Sometimes I'd wake up and hear him coughing lightly in the next room, and my heart would soften. I told myself I was no Daka. longer a dreamy young girl, a peaceful home, a good son, a responsible Socian, husband that was enough. After returning from the medical center, our familiar house suddenly felt alien. The antique grandfather clock ticked rhythmically. The fine china tea set sat, perfectly aligned on the shelf. The English ivy on the conservatory windowsill was lush green because I watered it every morning. But when Richard bent down to fetch my slippers, as he usually did, a chill ran down my spine. "Go and change, I'll make you a cup of warm tea." His voice was gentle. "Don't let what happened this morning bother you." I looked at his hand holding the slippers. That same hand had held mine through countless funerals, weddings, and Christmas dinners. And that same hand, just a little while ago in the hospital, had squeezed my wrist until it bruised. I said, "There's no need." He froze. "Margaret?" I wouldn't look at him. "I'm a bit tired. I want to lie down in my room for a while." My tone made him stiffen. Normally, I would call him darling or use a much warmer tone. My words weren't loud or harsh, but the sheer distance in them was enough to freeze the air between us. Richard put the slippers down, forcing a smile. "All right, get some rest. I'll make some chicken broth for you." I didn't reply. Passing through the living room, I saw the glass mug resting on the coffee table. Inside was a tiny remnant of a pale yellow liquid, the drink he always made for me after dinner. He claimed it was a comprehensive herbal supplement, good for sleep and easing hot flushes. I had drunk it almost every night for years. If I ever forgot, he would remind me, "Margaret, your supplement is getting cold." I used to find that attentiveness heartwarming. Now, looking at it, I only saw a thin ring of residue clinging to the bottom of the glass, pale and stubborn like a stain that refused to wash away. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door. Just as I was about to let go of the handle, I heard Richard pacing in the living room. His footsteps were uneven. He seemed to stop outside my door for a few seconds before walking away. I leaned my back against the wood, my heart beating very slowly, every beat feeling heavy. When evening came, he knocked. "Margaret, I've made some chicken broth. Eat a little." I opened the door. He stood there holding a tray, a steaming bowl of broth, a small plate of buttered toast, and a glass of warm water. His face was etched with worry. In the past, just seeing him like this would have melted my heart. I would have blamed myself for overthinking, blamed the doctor for talking nonsense, blamed my age for making me paranoid. But today, my eyes didn't meet his. I stared at the glass of water on the tray. "Leave it there." He smiled awkwardly. "I'll bring it in for you." I said, "Leave it there." My voice dropped lower. Richard stood dead still, the smile freezing on his lips. A moment later, he set the tray on the small table by the door. "Margaret, please don't be like this. I know you had a shock today, but we've been married for so many years. Do you really not understand me?" I wanted to laugh, but my lips wouldn't move. Understand him? Those words sounded so worn out. I once thought I knew every tiny habit of his. He liked his fish lightly battered. He never drank coffee after 4 p.m. His shirts had to be hung by color, from light to dark. He had to sleep with the window slightly ajar. I remembered all of it. But in the end, what a woman knows about her husband is sometimes just the dust on the table. Only when you wipe it away do you see the crack underneath. "Please leave. I want to rest." He looked at me for a long time. In his eyes there was pity, helplessness, and something else, something minuscule that flickered and vanished. Had this morning not happened, I would have called it heartbreak. Now I thought it looked more like fear. The door clicked shut. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the broth cooling on the table. The faint scent of parsley drifted up. In previous years, whenever I was unwell, he would cook this for me. It was often bland, but I would praise it, believing that a man willing to cook for his wife was a rare treasure. Night fell slowly. The room grew dark, illuminated only by the amber glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains. I didn't turn on the light. Sitting in the dark, I listened to Richard opening the medicine cabinet, the water running in the kitchen, his phone buzzing very faintly before being silenced. Every ordinary sound now dragged a long tail of suspicion behind it. Nearing 11 p.m., my phone lit up. A text from him. "Are you asleep? Tomorrow we'll go somewhere else for a retest." I don't want you to be sad. I stared at the words on the screen and didn't reply. A while later, he texted, "Again, I'm sorry I lost my temper this morning. I was just terrified someone was trying to frighten you." I remained silent. When a woman still wants to believe, a single apology is enough. But when her heart starts to turn cold, every word of concern feels like a cloth thrown over something rotting. The more you cover it, the more unbearable it becomes. I stood up, walked to the door, and placed my hand on the lock. From our wedding day until now, despite sleeping separately for 20 years, I had never locked my door against him. Richard might not step inside, but the door between us had always been left slightly ajar, a final act of trust I maintained in this marriage. That night, I turned the lock. The click was incredibly quiet, but inside me, it felt as if something had snapped. Outside, instant silence. I knew he had heard it. Through the solid oak, I could sense him freezing at the end of the hallway. No one spoke, no one knocked. There was only the ticking of the grandfather clock in the lounge, striking each beat with cold, rhythmic indifference. I returned to bed, lying down but unable to close my eyes. The ceiling was a blur in the darkness, old memories piling on top of one another. The rainy night, his knees on the wooden floor, his sobbing, his promise never to hurt me. Then this morning's test results appeared, alongside Dr. Sterling's gaze when he asked about our marital life. If he truly hadn't touched me out of fear of infecting me, where did those drugs in my system come from? If he loved me, why had he panicked so much this morning? That he dragged me away? If the past 20 years were a sacrifice, why did I suddenly feel not like someone being protected, but someone locked inside a cage? Question followed question, none with an answer, but one thought slowly surfaced, cold and sharp as a needle. Perhaps I have never known the man I've shared a house with. In the middle of the night, I heard Richard pacing in the living room. His footsteps grew near, then distant. A few times, he stopped outside my door as if to knock. I held my breath, waiting, but he eventually walked away. That silence offered no peace. It was the silence of a man calculating what to cover up first, and what lie to tell next. It was nearly dawn when I finally drifted off. In a fitful sleep, I dreamt I was standing in our old kitchen holding the glass of pale yellow liquid. Richard stood behind me, his face obscured by shadows. He said, "Drink it, darling. It's good for your health." I looked down at the glass. At the bottom lay a layer of undissolved white powder. I woke with a violent start, cold sweat soaking my nightgown. Outside the window, the sky was just brightening. The rumble of the early milk float echoed. From the street, the room was exactly as it had been, the tray of broth by the sea. Door was stone cold. I sat up, looking at my hands. My fingers were trembling. Slightly, but my mind was unnervingly clear. I unlocked the door. The living room was dimly lit. Richard was curled up on the dudo sofa, covered only by a thin throw. His glasses sat askew on the coffee table, next to his phone placed face down. He was sleeping restlessly, his brows deeply furrowed, his hand half clenched as if clinging to something. Hearing the door open, he bolted upright. "Margaret, are you awake?" His voice was raspy, but his eyes were instantly alert, the alertness of a man who had been standing guard over a secret all night. He looked at me, then his gaze darted incredibly fast toward the untouched glass of water on the tray by my door. Just that single glance turned my heart to ice. Richard didn't look like a husband worried his wife was angry. He looked like a man terrified his secret was out. "Did you manage to sleep? I was so worried about you last night." I looked at him for a few seconds before turning toward the kitchen. "I'm fine." He stood up and followed me. His steps were slightly rushed, but as he entered the kitchen, he slowed down as if afraid to annoy me. I opened the cupboard, took out some oats, and began running the tap. The sound of water splashing into the platter. The saucepan made the kitchen feel somewhat normal again. This house was used to bedraid en alarm. Mornings like this, I would make porridge or eggs. He would read the news on his phone, then ask what I was buying at Waitrose later. A peaceful life is sometimes just the repetition of countless small actions. "Let me do that. You should rest." "No need. I'll just have some plain porridge. Is that all right for you?" He paused, probably surprised I was even asking what he wanted to eat, then a face relaxed a fraction. "Yes, whatever you make is perfect." I turned and offered a faint smile, the same accommodating smile I had used for 20 years. A smile that spared everyone from awkwardness. About yesterday. The doctor must have made a mistake. I thought about it. Maybe those herbal supplements I took a while back skewed the results. Richard's eyes lit up instantly. A wave of immense relief washed over his face, like someone who had just narrowly dodged a torrential downpour. He took a day enadata tite, half step towards me, his hand reaching out as if to touch my shoulder. Exactly, that's exactly what I thought, you see? I told you. Doctors these days see a weird number and want to frighten you. Give it a few days, and I'll take you to a specialist in Harley Street for peace of mind. I leaned over to grab a spoon from the drawer, smoothly dodging his hand. Yes, we'll sort it later. His hand hovered in midair for a second before he pulled it back. I heard him exhale softly but completely differently from the night before. He thought I had softened. He thought yesterday's storm had passed. The man who had lived with me for 30 years still believed that as long as he spoke in a gentle tone, I would find a way to forgive everything before even asking the questions. Breakfast that morning was eerily peaceful. I served 2 bowls of porridge, placing a small jar of the marmalade he liked on the table. Richard ate while chatting about work, mentioning that his department had a major review next month and he had to rush some end-of-year reports. He desperately tried to drag the conversation back to mundane things. I sat opposite him, holding my spoon, stirring my cooling porridge. Every time he shot me a probing glance, I met it with calm eyes. Playing the good wife wasn't hard. The hard part was playing the part while keeping my heart from trembling. After breakfast, Richard proactively washed the dishes, the clinking of china in the sink echoing in the room. I stood in the living room, folding the throw he had slept under. My eyes swept across the coffee table. His phone was still face down, just a handspan from the edge. I had never paid attention to how closely he guarded his phone before. Perhaps because I never had the desire to pry into his private life. I thought that when a husband and wife live together for so long, what you need to keep is trust, not passwords. Now I understood. There are people who don't need you to trust them. They just need you not to ask questions. Over the next few days, I reverted to my role as the old wife, cooking in the gradient tapixis morning, tending the garden in the afternoon, reminding him to take his blood pressure pills at night. Out of guilt and fear, Richard was even more attentive than before. He bought a small bunch of daffodils and placed them on the dining table, claiming they caught his eye. He volunteered to mop the floors, hung up the laundry, and told me not to lift heavy things. Every time he did something like this, I smiled and accepted it without exposing him, without questioning him. But inside, I was taking notes. Richard had a habit that I had never found strange before. After lunch, around 3 p.m., he would retreat into his study. The door would shut and the internal lock would click very softly. He said it was his time to handle sensitive corporate files and he needed absolute quiet. I had respected this so much that in 20 years I hadn't stepped inside once while the door was locked. Sometimes, bringing him tea, I would leave it outside the door, not daring to knock too loudly. Thinking back, my understanding nature was like a clean rag he used to wipe away his tracks. On Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting in the living room mending a loose thread on a cushion cover when I heard his voice from the study. It was very faint, as if he were on the phone. I put my needle down and walked softly towards the hallway. The oak door was firmly shut. A thin sliver of yellow light spilled from the gap underneath. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard his tone drop much softer than the voice he used with his colleagues. A moment later, the talking stopped. A chair scraped lightly across the floor. I instantly hurried back to the sofa, picking up the cushion as if nothing had happened. Seconds later, Richard opened the door and stepped out, phone still in hand. Seeing me in the living room, he paused. "You're sitting here?" "Yes, just fixing this cushion. Do you want some water?" "No, I'll get it myself." He said this while sliding his phone into his trouser pocket, the motion so swift it was practically a reflex. I looked down, threading the needle. The white thread slipped past the eye. Several times. My eyes were cast down, but my mind was entirely focused on the study door, a door that had existed in my house for years, yet only today did it truly transform into something that hid secrets. I started paying close attention to his phone. Whether he was eating, showering, or watering the plants in the conservatory, the phone was always within reach. If he put it on a table, it was always face down. If a message arrived, he'd glance at it rapidly and turn the screen off. Once, during dinner, the phone buzzed. He picked it up, his expression shifting slightly, then stood up, saying, "Work calling, I need to take this." He stepped out onto the patio, closing the glass door, leaving only his silhouette projected onto the thin curtains. I sat in the dining room, watching my roast potatoes go cold. In the past, there had been countless calls like this. I used to think men with high-pressure jobs couldn't avoid being busy. Now, every ringtone felt like a stone thrown into a lake, creating ripples of suspicion that refused to fade. On Wednesday, Richard took a longer afternoon nap than usual. Perhaps the tension of the last few days had exhausted him. I waited until his light snoring drifted from the guest room before walking to the front door to take his heavy key ring from the wooden hook. It held many keys: the front door, the car, the filing cabinet, the study door. I picked them up, my palms slick with sweat. All my life, I had rarely done anything deceitful. If a cashier gave me a few pence extra in change, I'd walk back to return it. Yet that day, I dropped the keys into my coat pocket, changed my shoes, and slipped out the door as quietly as a thief in my own home. The Timpson's kiosk on the high street was tiny. The elderly locksmith was tinkering with a watch battery, a small desk fan whirring beside him. I placed the study key on the glass counter, trying to keep my voice steady. "Could you cut a spare of this one for me, please?" The man peered at me over his reading glasses and asked no questions. The machine whirred to life, the screech of metal grinding against metal grating on my ears. I stood watching the silver shards fly, my heart racing. Those few short minutes felt as long as an entire afternoon. When he handed me the newly cut key, it was still warm. I gripped it tightly in my fist, feeling as if I were holding a piece of a door carved straight out of the shadows. Back home, Richard was still asleep. I hung the keyring back on its hook, arranging each key exactly as it had been, then went to the kitchen and washed my hands for a very long time. The freezing tap water rushed through my fingers, but it couldn't wash away the nervous adrenaline clinging to my skin. That evening, I sought an opportunity with his phone. Richard went to take a place. Shower, the sound of water running steadily in the bathroom. His phone was on. The coffee table, the screen pitch black. I walked over and picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. When the screen woke, a passcode grid appeared: 9. Silent dots mocking me. I tried Oliver's birthday in a simple swipe. Incorrect. I tried our wedding anniversary. Incorrect. His birthday. Incorrect. An M4. Margaret. Still incorrect. Every time the phone buzzed gently to signal an error, my heart skipped a beat. The water in the bathroom fluctuated. It sounded like a countdown. A notification popped up. Incorrect passcode. 1 attempt remaining before lockout. I instantly placed the phone back in its exact spot, face down. Seconds later, the shower stopped. Richard opened the door and stepped out, his hair damp, a towel draped over his shoulders. I was sitting on the sofa, watching the BBC News, remote in hand. He glanced at the phone, then at me. "What are you watching?" "News about the storms up north." He muttered an acknowledgement and picked up his phone. I saw his thumb trace a very fast pattern on the screen. Not his birthday, not our anniversary, not anything belonging to this family. That passcode belonged to somewhere else. That night, when he went to his guest room, I sat alone in the living room for a long time. The warm ceiling lights cast long shadows over everything. The new key was in my pocket, resting against my skin, hot from my anxiety. I knew I couldn't rush. The current phone was too heavily guarded. The study might hold something, but if I opened it at the wrong time, I'd tip him off. My eyes absent-mindedly settled on the bottom drawer of the TV cabinet. It was where we kept obsolete odds and ends. Old charging cables, remote batteries, expired warranty cards, a broken digital camera, and old mobile phones replaced over the years. I pulled the drawer open slightly. The smell of dust and old plastic wafted up. In the corner, beneath a tangled nest of cables, lay a black smartphone with chipped edges and a hairline crack across the screen. It was the phone Richard had used before upgrading last year. When he tossed it in there, he had said the battery was shot and there was nothing important left on it. I had heard him and forgotten it immediately. But now, looking at that old phone, lying silently in the shadows, I had a sudden gut feeling that it wasn't just junk. Richard's past might still be trapped inside it. The phone stayed in the drawer all night, and I barely slept. A few times I got up, walked to the living room, pulled the drawer open a fraction, and pushed it shut again. A dead object with a black screen, yet it terrified me. I was terrified it contained nothing, which would mean my suspicions were baseless and I was tarnishing 30 years of marriage with the paranoia of an old woman. But I was even more terrified that it did contain something. Once that screen lit up, there might be no turning back for my life. The next morning, Richard acted as if nothing was amiss. He woke early and went to the local bakery, bringing back fresh bacon buddies and a cup of Earl Grey tea for me. Placing the paper bag on the table, he looked at me carefully. Eat. Up while it's hot. I've got a Zoom meeting at 3 p.m. today. I might be in the study for a while. I picked up my tea and nodded. All right, get your work done. He observed my face for a few seconds. I knew he was searching for traces of anger, suspicion, of a woman about to explode. But I had scrubbed it all clean. On my face was only the placid look of a woman used to enduring. By the afternoon, I made no move toward the study or the old phone. The closer you get to a secret, the slower you must tread. I put on a load of laundry, wiped down the kitchen counters, and sat peeling potatoes while he went into his study and locked the door. The turn of the key was faint, but I heard it as clearly as a dropping pin. Around 4:30 p.m., he emerged, looking more relaxed. Perhaps he had finished his parony, chat with whoever it was. Perhaps his secret felt securely guarded. That evening, I cooked a hearty beef stew with buttery mash. Richard praised the meat for being tender. He chatted about a colleague retiring soon, suggesting that maybe after we retired, the two of us should take a few trips to unwind. I sat opposite him, watching the steam rise from my bowl, blurring his face. There were moments I felt like I was rewatching a play I had seen too many times. The actors knew their lines, the audience knew the plot, only the truth was locked away backstage. After dinner, I washed up. Richard sat in the living room watching the evening news, his phone in his hand. I heard the newsreader discussing petrol prices, heavy rainfall, and an online fraud case. Those distant events drifted through my house, while my mind revolved around one singular task. I had to get that old phone without arousing his suspicion. The opportunity came when I brought him a mug of hot milk, a habit of many years, only this time there was no care in my heart. Richard looked up, smiling faintly. You still made this for me? I thought if you didn't, I'd have trouble sleeping. He seemed genuinely pleased by this, pleased enough to drop his guard. As he reached out to take the mug, I intentionally tilted the base. The hot, white liquid sloshed over the rim, spilling right onto his gray jumper and trousers. Oh my goodness, how clumsy of me. I quickly set the mug down and grabbed some kitchen roll. Go and change your jumper before it sets in and smells. Richard sprang to his feet, looking at the stain, then at me. A flash of annoyance crossed his face, but he quickly forced a laugh. It's fine, just a splash. You're tired, don't worry about it. I wiped the table. Go and change or you'll catch a chill. He nodded, grabbing his phone out of habit, but the wet jumper sticking to his stomach irritated him. As he bent his head to pull the jumper over his ears, the phone slipped from his grasp and fell onto the sofa. I was a beat faster, picking it up before he could. Your hands are sticky with milk. Leave it, I'll wipe it down, go and change. He hesitated, just for a second. Then, perhaps because I seemed so utterly normal, he set his current phone on the TV cabinet, right in his line of sight, and walked into the bedroom. I grabbed the cloth to wipe the table, my heart hammering wildly. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. I heard the wardrobe creak open. I had maybe 20 seconds. I slid the bottom drawer open, shoved my hand under the tangle of cables, pulled out the old cracked phone, and shoved it deep into the pocket of my cardigan draped over the dining chair. I shut the drawer and continued wiping the milk off the table as if my hands had never left it. Richard walked out in a fresh navy t-shirt, his hair slightly ruffled. His eyes immediately darted to the TV cabinet. Seeing his phone exactly where he left it, his shoulders visibly relaxed. I looked down, gathering the soggy kitchen roll to throw in the bin. My fingertips were freezing, but my expression remained passive. Let me help you. Wipe that up. It's done. Drink your milk. I'm heading to my room. I casually picked up my cardigan, the old phone dragging heavily in the pocket like a brick. Once in my room, I locked the door and leaned heavily against it for a long time. My heart pounded so hard my chest ached. I took the phone out and laid it on my bedside table. I tried pressing the power button. No response. I plugged it into a charger. The screen flickered, showing a red battery icon, then died. So it isn't completely dead. I sat staring at the battery bar edging up, millimeter by millimeter, as if watching an old door creak open. But half an hour later, it still wouldn't boot up. The battery was likely fried, or the data corrupted. I didn't dare mess with it further. One wrong move could wipe everything. I turned off the lamp, hid the phone at the bottom of my knitting basket in the wardrobe, and lay down. That night, I heard Richard walk past my door twice. The second time, he lingered. I held my breath. And eventually, he walked away. The next morning, I told him I was feeling unwell and wanted to take a day to go for a follow-up appointment alone, so as not to bother him. He immediately frowned. Let me drive you. No need. You have your meetings. I just need to ask the doctor a few questions. I'll call you if anything comes up. He looked at me, clearly uneasy. I set down my half-eaten toast, wiped my mouth with a napkin, and softened my voice. I don't want you worrying over every little thing. You were so stressed the other day. Let me just go alone and clear my head. Finally, after repeatedly telling me to call him, he let me leave the house. I didn't go to the hospital. I took a cab to an independent phone repair shop down a narrow alley near the high street. The sign was faded, the shop smelling of hot solder and dust. A technician in his 30s with thick glasses sat behind the counter dismantling a device. What can I do for you, love? I placed the old phone on the counter. This is my husband's old phone. It's been broken for a while. I want to recover some old photos and messages. Can you do it? He picked it up, plugging it into a specialized diagnostic cable. It's drawing a little power. If the memory chip isn't fried, there's a chance. But how much we can recover is a waiting game. Do you know the passcode? I shook my head. The technician glanced up at me. It wasn't an overly nosy look, but the look of someone in this trade who had seen it all. Without a passcode, it's trickier. I can try to extract the raw data from the storage chip. I can't guarantee full app messages, but we usually have decent luck with photos, audio files, and contacts. Do it, please. Whatever it costs, I said, only then realizing how hoarse my Fernie voice sounded. He remained silent for a few seconds, then wrote out a slip. Wait a bit. Come. Back later and I'll see what I can do. I sat in a Costa Coffee opposite the alley from 10 a.m. until nearly 4 p.m. The ice in my iced latte melted completely, leaving a wet ring on the table. Outside, life went on, people chatting, cars driving by, a child crying for its mother. The world kept turning, but I sat entirely still, my hands resting on my handbag, feeling as though every cell in my body was waiting for a phone call. At 3:50 p.m., the technician rang. You can come back, I've got data. Those words made me stand up so fast I felt dizzy. I crossed the street, narrowly missing a cyclist who shouted after me, though I couldn't hear what he said. Inside the shop, the tech handed me a small USB drive and a cheap, temporary burner phone where he had copied the data into separate folders. Got quite a few photos, some voice notes, a chunk of text messages, some files, are corrupted and incomplete. Have a quick look and sign here. I took the temporary phone and tapped the photos folder. The very first image that popped up was taken at an amusement park. Richard stood in the center, wearing a bright polo shirt, his arm wrapped around a woman significantly younger than me. Next to them was a teenage boy, smiling broadly, holding an ice cream. The boy's eyes were exactly like Richard's. His nose was like Richard's. The way he tilted his head when he smiled was identical. I stared at that photo for so long that the technician had to ask, "Are you all right, madam?" I nodded, though no sound came from my throat. I swiped to the next. Photos at the beach in Brighton. Birthday photos. Photos inside an apartment with cream-colored curtains. Photos of Richard holding the boy when he was a toddler, his face radiant with a joy that made my eyes burn. So many years of his life were contained in these files, I just wasn't in any of them. The woman in the photos was saved in the fragmented texts as Chloe. Some texts, I were just scraps, the first half missing, the second half intact. I read words like, I miss you, Leo is being so good, I'll come over to you and him this weekend. Each short line was like a needle. It didn't stab you once and kill you, it stabbed slowly, bit by bit, forcing you to remain awake while you bled. I paid him, put the USB and the burner phone in my bag. Before leaving, I asked the technician to wipe all traces of his work from the old phone and return it to its exact broken state. He nodded, asking no questions. I didn't go straight home. I went to a quiet, empty pub at the end of the street and chose a booth in the corner. Outside, a light drizzle began to fall, drawing long streaks of water down the window panes. I plugged the USB into my own phone, using an adapter, methodically backing up all the data to a newly created email account, then sent a draft to an alternate address. My hands were shaking, but my actions were strangely precise. In the messages folder, I opened a partially recovered file. White background, black text, many missing characters. An incomplete conversation appeared, but it was enough to crush my heart. Chloe, you keep saying wait. When are you finally going to leave the woman? In the house? I stared blankly at that sentence. The woman in the house. Not his wife, Margaret, not the person who had cared for him for 20 years. Just the woman in the house. I sat in the empty pub until it grew completely dark. Outside, the drizzle coated the tarmac in a thin sheen of water, and passing car headlights blurred into yellow smears. The plate of fish and chips in front of me was cold and soggy, the wedge of lemon half squeezed. I couldn't eat. My throat felt as though a stone was lodged in it, even swallowing saliva hurt. That text message still glowed on the screen. When will you leave the woman in the house? I read it over and over until the letters burned into my retinas. Those 6 words didn't curse me out, didn't use profanity, yet they held enough power to strip away every ounce of identity I had maintained for half my life. In their eyes, I wasn't a wife. I wasn't the woman who birthed his child, who nursed him through every supposed illness, who cooked every meal and washed every shirt. I was just an appliance placed in the house for his convenience. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Richard was calling. I looked at his name, flashing on my personal phone. My finger hovered over the reject button, but I didn't press it immediately. After 30 years of living together, I knew his calling habits by heart. If he called once and hung up, he wanted me to buy something from the shops. If he called twice in a row, he was getting anxious. The screen went dark, then lit up less than 3 seconds later. His second call, I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. Richard's voice came through, still, gentle, but with a taut string of tension underneath. Margaret, where are you? Why aren't you home yet? I've been calling. I had some errands to run. I'm on my way back. Did you go back to the clinic? What did the doctor say? I looked down at the tiny USB drive in my palm, an object the size of my fingernail, yet it contained a fault line massive enough to bring my entire house crashing down. Nothing. They told me to keep monitoring it. He exhaled loudly. Well, that's good then. Come home. I'll warm up some dinner. For you. I murmured in agreement and hung up. Somehow, hearing him say I'll warm up some dinner for you made me feel sicker than if he had been cold. A man could refer to his wife as the woman in the house and still dutifully heat up her dinner. It turns out that gentleness isn't always love. Sometimes, it's just the habit of keeping a trap well-oiled so it doesn't squeak. I didn't head home immediately. I kept scrolling through the recovered messages. Some words were missing, some were just disjointed sentences, but every fragment was razor sharp. Chloe texted reminding him about Leo's A-levels, Richard said. He would cover the tuition. Chloe asked when he would take her and their son on holiday. Richard promised he'd sort it out after he retired. Then, one exchange dragged my heart to the absolute bottom. Chloe, so what value does she still have that you won't dump her? Richard, wait until my retirement payout is finalized. She's used to running everything at home. Ditching her now would just cause a mess. I placed the phone on the table, my hands numb with cold. In my 30 years as a wife, I had been angry with him a few times over minor things. He forgot my birthday. He missed Oliver's parents' evening. He came back late from the pub, without calling. But those angers always had a way back. He only needed to say a Few words or buy me a box of those chocolate truffles I liked, and I would tell myself that men are just naturally thoughtless. But the truth before my eyes left no way back. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It was cold calculation. I backed everything up one last time, turned the device off, and put everything back in my bag. As I stood up, my knees felt weak. The barmaid looked at me with pity. My face must have been ghostly pale. I forced a smile, paid for my greeted, untouched food, and stepped out into the rain. When I got home, Richard had already set the table. A plate of roast chicken, some boiled vegetables, and a jug of gravy. He was wearing an apron, holding a dishcloth, a sight so familiar it broke my heart. Seeing me, he immediately came over to take my coat. I sidestepped smoothly and hung it up myself. What's wrong? You look awful. Is it cold out? Let me get you a cardigan. No. Need. I sat down at the table and picked up my fork. Eat up. He watched me. For a few seconds before sitting opposite me, the meal passed to the faint clinking of cutlery. At one point, he served a piece of chicken onto my plate. I stared at the white meat sitting on my potatoes. I said nothing. Years ago, whenever he served me food, I felt a rush of warmth. Now, I only wondered if, after this meal, he would go into his study and text that woman to say that the woman in the house seemed fine today. That night, I texted Fiona. She had been my best friend since we started working together in our 20s. We met at a secretarial training course and had been thick as thieves ever since. She was blunt and hot-tempered, but fiercely loyal. Over the years, she had repeatedly told me to live for myself and stop hovering around Richard like a ghost. I usually laughed it off. Some advice is correct, but if the listener hasn't heard enough yet, it just blows past their ears like the wind. I texted, Fiona, are you free? I need to see you. She called back instantly. Your text sounds serious. What's wrong, Meg? I sat in my bedroom, staring at the locked door. I need you to look at something for me. It's really important. The line went quiet for a few seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped an octave. Tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. The old tea room. Bring everything. You have. The next morning, I told Richard I wanted to go to a larger market further away to buy some specific ingredients. He wasn't suspicious, even telling me to take an Uber so I wouldn't tire myself out. I nodded, putting the USB, the burner, phone, and a few medical results into my bag. Before leaving, I took one last look at the living room, the brown leather sofa, the English ivy, the family portrait on the wall. In the photo, I stood next to Richard Oliver in the middle, all three of us smiling. It turns out a photograph only captures a fraction of a second. It doesn't capture the truth. The old tea room was tucked down a quiet street, a magnificent wisteria draping over its entrance. Fiona arrived before me, wearing a navy blouse, her short hair impeccably styled, her favorite jade bracelet on her wrist. The moment she saw me, the smile vanished from her face. She pulled out a chair for me and didn't mince words. Show me. I placed the burner phone on the table and opened the photo folder first. Fiona frowned initially, but her complexion slowly drained to a pallid white. When she reached the photo of Richard standing between Chloe and Leo behind a birthday cake, his hand on the boy's shoulder, she slammed her hand on the table. Her teacup rattled, spilling Earl Grey onto a napkin. That absolute bastard, she hissed through clenched teeth. He dared do this to you? I didn't speak. She scrolled to the text messages. The more she read, the redder her face grew with rage. When she reached the woman in the house, she stood up abruptly, grabbing her handbag as if ready to sprint. Come on. You and I are going to his office. If not there, straight to that bitch's flat. I'm going to rip his hypocritical mask off for the whole world to see. I caught her arm. Her hand was burning hot. Mine was freezing. Sit down, Fiona. How can you be this calm? Her eyes were bloodshot. 20 years, Meg. He conned you for 20 years. You nursed him like an invalid. And he's out there, keeping a mistress and a bastard child. Are you just going to swallow this? I'm not swallowing it. I looked at her, hearing my own voice sounding bizarrely composed, but I also don't want to look like a madwoman screaming in the streets. I've been cheapened enough by him. I won't cheapen myself further. Fiona stopped. After a moment, she sat back down, her hands still shaking with fury. Then what do you want to do? I looked out at the wisteria, watching a purple petal flutter down onto the red. brick pavement. I want him to lose the thing he is most terrified of losing. His reputation. His reputation, his money, his family, and that cloak of decency he's worn for decades. Fiona stared at me for a long time. Her anger slowly morphed into profound sympathy. She reached out and grasped my hands. Meg, listen to me, we can't do this purely on emotion. He's a calculating bastard. I bet his assets are tied up. In knots, too. You need a solicitor. I don't know any. I do, she said instantly. James Hughes. He handles corporate accounts for my firm, specializes in incredibly messy, high-asset divorces. He's discreet as a dade. Grave. I'll get you an appointment this afternoon. I nodded. That entire morning, Fiona helped me organize the evidence. Photos in one folder, texts in another, voice notes in a third. The medical results were kept separate. She also warned me never to keep the originals on my personal phone or daily handbag. Men like Richard, the second they realize what you have, they'll try to wipe the slate clean before they even bother apologizing. Her words made me look up. She didn't know it, but I had thought the exact same thing last night. A man capable of staging a 20-year play wouldn't hesitate to tell a few more lies for a few more days. That afternoon, Solicitor Hughes met us in a small, discreet office on the 6th floor of an older building in central London. He was around 40, wearing thick, black-rimmed glasses, and spoke slowly and clearly. He didn't act shocked like Fiona, nor did he offer lengthy condolences. He examined every photo, read every text, asked about timelines, asked about Leo's age, asked whose name was on the deeds, who managed the bank accounts, and whether properties were bought before or after the marriage. His questions were dry, but they pulled me out of my emotional mire. I began to recall every detail. Our current house was bought after the wedding. It was in joint names, a buy-to-let flat in his name, but the mortgage was paid from our joint account. The car was bought 8 years ago. As for the savings, I only knew they existed, not the exact figures. I felt a deep flush of shame, realizing I had managed every morsel of food my husband ate, yet was completely blind to my own family's financial reality. Solicitor Hughes closed the file and looked at me. Mrs. Evans, what you have is vital, but it's not enough for a flawless strike. Texts and photos prove infidelity. Proving paternity of the child would be a massive blow to him. But before we confront him, you must know the full extent of the assets, and you need concrete proof that he is actively maintaining a second household. What do I need to do? Do not rush to divorce. Do not confront him. Do not let him know you know. Hughes placed a finger on the stack of photos. We need bank statements, property deeds, details of that other flat, his exact schedule, and clear photos of his face in public with them. The more specific, the better. And the most important thing. He paused and the room went dead silent. I could hear the hum of the air, conditioning overhead, and the thud of my own heart against my ribs. Solicitor Hughes said, "To win, you must witness his second family with your own eyes." That sentence followed me all the way home. You must witness it with your own eyes. It sounded simple, but to me, it was no different from taking a scalpel to a wound that hadn't even begun to scab over. The data on the old phone was enough to agonize me, the texts enough to humiliate me, but it all remained trapped behind a screen, separated from me by cold glass. Seeing it with my own eyes meant stepping into Richard's actual reality. It meant watching how he smiled, how he loved, how he played the father in a place where I did not exist. Fiona didn't let me wander blindly. She used her contacts to trace the locations from the remaining photo metadata. 3 days later, she sent me an address. A luxury apartment block in Battersea Reach, a high-end development, a 40-minute drive from my house, barring traffic. Her text read, 18th floor, flat registered. To a Chloe Jenkins, you have to be careful. I read that text in the kitchen while a pot of stew bubbled on the stove. Richard was in the living room watching the telly and peeling a tangerine. The sharp, citrusy scent wafted into the kitchen. He called out, "Meg, want some tangerine? It's really sweet. I'll leave some. Here for you." My voice didn't shake. I'll have some later. Perhaps when a human being is pushed to a certain threshold of pain, they naturally develop a shell. It's not about being strong. It's just that if you don't harden up, you'll shatter on the spot. That evening, I told Richard that since the health check, I was still feeling rough. I wanted to take 2 days off to visit a specialist clinic across town and get some rest. Richard immediately fussed. I'll come with you. I want to go alone. I set my fork down and looked at him. It's women's issues, Richard. It's awkward having you there. Besides, you're busy with your end-of-year reports. He stayed quiet for a moment, then, as usual, when he saw I wasn't being argumentative, he opted for gentleness. All right, just let me know where you are. Call me if anything happens. Don't leave me worrying. I smiled. I will. The next morning, I drove my old Nissan out of the driveway. It was the car Richard had often told me to sell because I rarely used it, but I kept it. A small silver hatchback with worn seats and a noisy aircon. But it was one of the few things in that house that truly belonged to me. I didn't go to a clinic. I drove straight across the river to the road facing the Battersea Reach apartments. The complex was pristine and modern. The security gate had a barrier, the flower beds were immaculately trimmed, and the glass lobby reflected the midday sun. I parked in a blind spot across the Blaine Street, under the shade of an old oak tree. From there, I had a clear view of the underground car park entrance and part of Block B's main doors. Inside the car, I had prepared bottled water, a sandwich, a face mask, sunglasses, and my phone set to a high-zoom camera mode. The first day dragged slower than I imagined. From 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., I sat almost motionless. People came and went. Delivery drivers, mothers with prams, an old man walking his dog, young women in sharp office wear. Every time a black Audi like Richard's approached, my heart would clench, then plummet when I realized it wasn't him. By 6 p.m., the sky began to darken. The lobby lights flickered on, casting a p.m. golden glow onto the pavement. At 5:58 p.m., Richard's car appeared. I recognized it instantly, even as it turned the corner in the distance. I had wiped that number plate countless times when he asked me to wash the car. The car drove slowly, without hesitation, like a man driving a route he knew, blindfolded. The security guard nodded, the barrier raised, and Richard steered. Down into the underground park, the motion so natural it broke my heart. I sat paralyzed in the driver's seat, both hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the concrete ramp that had swallowed the black Audi. There was no prominent thunderclap, no screaming. The city remained as noisy as ever. A few mopeds beeped behind me. A big issue seller walked past and tapped lightly on my window, but inside my chest, something had quietly collapsed. I stayed there until past 9 p.m. The windows in the tower block lit up one by one. I didn't know which flat was Chloe's, but looking at those illuminated squares, I kept asking myself if one of them held a hot dinner. The sound of laughter and Richard sitting at the head of the table as a true father and husband. My house was dark and cold, while here, a light burned for him. At 9:15 p.m., I started the engine to head home. On the way, Richard called. I let it ring for a while before answering. Where are you, Meg? Finished at the clinic. Just stopped for some soup. I'm on my way back. What did the specialist say? Nothing new. They'll call when the results are in. He paused for a few seconds. Drive safely. I've got a late meeting at the firm. Tonight, might be back late. I stared at the traffic ahead, the corners of my mouth twitching into a ghost of a smile. Yes, you be careful too. The next day, I returned to Battersea Reach. I arrived earlier, parked in the Kinze, exact same spot, wore a different coat, and pulled a wide-brimmed hat low over my face. I hadn't slept all night, but my mind was razor sharp. I wasn't crying anymore. Last night's tears had been forced back inside, forming something silent and glacial. Around 10 a.m., 3 people walked out of Block B. First was Chloe. I recognized her immediately from the recovered photos. She had a slender figure, wavy hair, wearing a beige dress and carrying a designer leather handbag. In person, she didn't look like a teenager, but she was meticulously groomed, the look of a woman who knew someone was footing the bill. Beside her was a boy almost as tall as Richard, wearing a white hoodie, a backpack slung over one shoulder. Leo. Even if no one had told me his name, I would have known. That face was so much like Richard's, it was suffocating. The last person to step out was Richard. He wasn't wearing his stiff corporate .00 shirts like he did at home. He wore a light blue polo shirt and chinos, looking like relaxed. The cautious, exhausted aura he had carried for the past few days had vanished. His face here was lighter, younger, like a man who had just taken off a heavy overcoat. Leo said something. Richard leaned in to listen, then burst out laughing. He reached out and ruffled the boy's hair. The gesture was so intimate, so effortlessly natural, that my fingernails dug deep into my palms. When Oliver was little, he loved having his dad ruffle his hair, but Richard rarely did it. He used to say boys needed to be tough and not cling to their fathers. He was too busy for parents' evenings, too busy for school exams. The day Oliver ran a high fever and was admitted to the hospital, Richard was away, on a business trip. I used to explain to my son on his behalf, saying Dad loved him but just didn't know how to show it. Now, watching him ruffle Leo's hair, I understood. It wasn't that he didn't know how to show affection. He had simply chosen to show it somewhere else. Chloe stopped by the car, bending down to adjust her shoe strap. Without a second thought, Richard immediately stooped down, grabbed her ankle, rested it on the low curb, and helped her fasten it. The tenderness in the action was nauseatingly profound. Chloe smiled, patting his shoulder playfully. Leo stood by, watching without a hint of surprise. To him, this was just his mum and dad. Being normal. Mum and dad. Those words pierced me slower than everything else. I sat in the car, raising my phone, the camera zoomed all the way in. My hands were incredibly steady. So steady it felt alien. Snap after snap. Richard. Opening the car door for Chloe. Richard placing a hand on Leo's back. The three of them standing in the sun like a family on a weekend outing. The light hit their faces blindingly bright. When their car drove away, I remained motionless. The camera was off, the dark screen reflecting my own face. The woman staring back had red eyes, but no tears. Her skin was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. I looked at her and suddenly felt more pity than anger. She had spent half her life living for a man who didn't deserve it. She had convinced herself that suffering was a virtue, that endurance was what kept a home together, that a good wife shouldn't demand anything. I set the phone on the passenger seat. Cars whizzed past on the road, a red double-decker bus stopped at the station, commuters jostling to get on. The honks, the chatter, the distant hum of construction, it all blended into the loud chaos of life. Suddenly, my tears began to fall. At first, just a drop, then a flood. I buried my head in the steering wheel and wept without making a sound. I cried for 20 years of living like a ghost. I cried for the nights I lay, facing the wall, telling myself I had to pity my husband. I cried for Oliver, a boy who grew up with a distant father, while that same father had the time to take another son to the park, to the beach, to blow out birthday candles. And I cried for the woman I was, who for far too long had not been truly placed first by anyone. When the tears dried, there was nothing left inside me but a clean, frigid void. I took a tissue and wiped my face, reapplied a touch of pale lipstick, and opened my phone to check the photos. Clear faces, clear number plate, clear, intimate gestures, complete with time and date stamps. I forwarded all of them to my private email, then sent a copy to Fiona with the message. I saw them. She called back instantly. I didn't answer. There are moments when comfort only shatters you further. I needed to stay sharp. On the drive back, I stopped at a local Waitrose. I bought fresh vegetables, a prime cut of beef, a punnet of grapes Oliver loved, and a bottle of good gravy. Browning. Standing in the produce aisle, I pulled out my phone and called my son. Oliver worked in Manchester, busy and rarely home. The phone rang a few times before his voice came through the speaker, sounding slightly surprised. Mum? Calling at this hour? Are you all right? I held the punnet of grapes in my hand, staring at the purple fruit packed tightly in the plastic box. Can you come down this weekend? Come home for a meal. I have something important to discuss. The line went quiet for a moment. Oliver sensed something in my tone. Are you ill, Mum? Is Dad okay? I'll come down. What is it? Just come home. I want the whole family to sit down for a meal together. Oliver didn't push it. All right, Mum. I'll get the train down on Saturday. Afternoon. I hung up, standing still in the aisle for a few seconds. The cashier asked if I stacked it. Needed any carrier bags? I nodded. Everything suddenly felt bizarrely normal. The shopping, the cooking, the son coming home for the weekend. The only difference was that this meal wouldn't be a reunion. It would be the table where I served the absolute truth. That evening, when Richard got home, I was washing vegetables at the sink. He walked in, still carrying the faint scent of cologne and city air. Seeing me, slicing the meat, he asked cheerfully, "What's the special occasion?" "Oliver is coming home this weekend," I said. "I bought some groceries early. It's been a while since we all had a proper meal together." Richard's eyes lit up. His joy was so convincing that, had I not possessed the getter, photos on my phone, I might have softened. He dropped his briefcase and rolled up his sleeves. "Really? Ollie's coming back? Let me go and buy a nice joint of beef tomorrow. And some king prawns. He loves a prawn cocktail starter. I'll cook for you both this weekend." I watched him stand in my kitchen, enthusiastically planning the menu, talking about hitting the butcher early tomorrow. He thought this was a reunion dinner. After a few tense days, he thought I had called Oliver home to reset everything. Back to normal. He didn't know that from the moment I saw him ruffle Leo's hair. In the sun, all roads back had been demolished. Saturday morning, Richard woke earlier than usual. I heard the fridge opening, the rustle of plastic bags, the tap running while the morning mist still clung to the windows. The house hadn't felt this bustling with preparation in a long time. On the kitchen island, he laid out the prawns, the beef joint, the mushrooms, and wrote down a list of Oliver's favorite sides. If I didn't have a phone full of photos of him acting as a father elsewhere, this scene might have moved me. Richard turned and saw me at the door, smiling broadly. "You're up?" I'm thinking. "You're doing a proper Sunday roast, with the prawn cocktail first." Ollie's been working hard up north, he needs feeding properly. I looked at his hands prepping the veg, the same hands that had tied Chloe's shoe strap outside the luxury flats, as gently as handling a precious artifact. Now, those same hands were arranging prawns, claiming to remember his son's favorite meal. Some men are so incredibly skilled they can be fathers in 2 places, husbands in 2 houses, and never feel a shred of shame. "Oliver prefers the beef slightly pink," I said. "I'll make sure of it," he replied instantly. "I'll do all the cooking today. You just sit back and relax." I nodded, walking over to grab a cloth. A thin beam of morning sunlight lay across the wooden worktop. I wiped the already clean surface over and over. The familiar motion kept my hands from shaking. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Fiona. "Remember to turn the voice. Recorder on if you need it. Don't let him rile you up and lose the upper hand." I read it, swiped the notification away, and placed the phone face down next to the fruit bowl. Around midday, Oliver texted to say he was on the train. His voice sounded a bit tired, but he tried to sound upbeat. "Mum, I'll be there by late afternoon. Don't cook too much, I won't be able to eat it all." "Your dad is cooking," I said. "He said it's been too long since you were home." A beat of silence on the other end. "Dad's got the free time for that lately?" I didn't answer immediately. Oliver was perceptive. From a young age, he was used to reading adult moods, used to swallowing his disappointment because his cried in. Dad was busy. When he was in year 7, he stood by the school gates waiting for Eminoles, his dad, to watch his guitar recital. Richard had called to say something urgent, came up at work. Oliver came home, put his guitar in the corner, and never signed up for a performance again. At the time, I had hugged him and told him, Dad didn't do it on purpose. Looking back, my excuses were like a soft cloth thrown over my son's wounds. They covered it, but they didn't heal it. "Just come home. I'll be waiting." I hung up. The kitchen now smelled of roasting beef, rosemary, and sizzling fat. Richard was in and out of the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He even brought out our best bone china plates, polishing the cutlery, and placed his good bottle of red wine on the counter. Anyone looking in would. I think he was a man genuinely looking forward to a family gathering. I, holding the evidence in my hand, had a moment of stillness watching him taste the gravy. 30 years isn't a piece of paper you can just rip up and throw away. It is thousands of meals, thousands of days standing under the same roof, thousands of habits woven into your flesh. Betrayal in a marriage doesn't just break your heart, it pollutes every memory that used to be pure. As evening approached, I went to my room to change. I chose a simple slate gray silk blouse, tied my hair back, and put on very little makeup. In the mirror, I saw a woman who was eerily calm, My eyes were slightly sunken from lack of sleep, but the gaze was no longer lost. I opened my drawer, took out the burner, phone loaded with the photos and audio files, checked the battery, checked the folders, and slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan draped over my chair. The originals were with Fiona and in my email. I was no longer afraid of a phone being snatched away. Just past 6 p.m., Oliver arrived. The turn of the key in the lock made my heart twinge. The door opened, and my son stood there pulling a small weekend bag. He was a bit taller than Richard, slim, with a neat haircut. As he stepped in, he looked at me first, then at his dad. His gaze lingered on my face longer than usual. "Mum." I walked over and took his hand. His hands were warm, the long fingers resembling mine. "You're back. Are you tired?" "No, I'm all right." He leaned down to hug me lightly. When he pulled back, he whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Are you okay, Mum?" I patted his arm. "Go wash your hands. Let's eat." Richard emerged from the kitchen, beaming. "Ollie's home. Give me your bag, I'll doke. Take it up. I've done all your favorites today." Oliver looked at his dad, offering a polite but strained smile. "It's fine, Dad. I'll take it up myself." Just one short sentence, but I heard the distance in it. Oliver had long ceased to be the little boy who threw himself into his father's arms. He had grown up, through missed promises and waiting in vain. Richard probably noticed it too, but he always chose to ignore it. To him, as long as no one flipped the table, everything was fine. Dinner began at 7 p.m. The table was laden. Roast beef, Yorkshire puddings, crispy roast potatoes, carrots, and a steaming jug of thick gravy. Richard opened the wine, poured a glass for himself, and offered a splash to Oliver. I sat opposite him, next to Oliver. The phone in my pocket had been recording the Silazad and, since we sat down, "Have some of the beef, Ollie." Richard placed a generous slice on Oliver's prostavlia plate. "You always loved this when you were younger. Remember when I used to take you to that carvery on Sundays? You'd clear your plate." Oliver held his fork, staring at the beef. "You hardly ever took me out when I was little, Dad." The atmosphere hitched. Richard laughed, completely ignoring the barb. "Well, I was busy, but I always loved you. Men, we don't always say it out loud." I looked down and speared a roast potato. That phrase was so familiar, it was laughable. Men don't say it. Men are busy. Men have their own way of loving. How? Many phrases like that had we women used to patch up the gaping holes in our own lives? Richard quickly changed the subject. He asked about Oliver's job in Manchester, his new project, his end-of-year bonus. Oliver answered in short, polite sentences. I chimed in occasionally, keeping the meal at a baseline of peace. The pendant light cast a soft glow over the hot food. To an outsider, we were a perfectly normal family. A hard-working husband serving food, a quiet wife, a son, home for the weekend. Only I knew that beneath the calm surface of the table, the truth was already laid out like a blade. Halfway through the meal, Richard poured more wine. His face was slightly flushed, his tone more expansive. Perhaps my silence over the last few days and Oliver's return made him truly believe the old order was restored. He raised his glass, looking at us affectionately. "It's been a long time since the three of us had a proper meal like this. Work is going to ease up for me soon. When your mum retires, I was thinking we could all go on a trip somewhere, the Lake District or Cornwall. We've worked hard all these years. It's time we lived a bit more comfortably." Oliver held his glass but didn't raise it. He turned to look at me. "Where do you want to go, Mum?" I put my knife and fork down. The clink of metal against china was very quiet, but it was enough to make Richard look up. I took a napkin, dabbed the corners of my mouth, and looked straight at the man sitting opposite me. For 30 years I had seen him in so many states. Youthful, exhausted, gentle, weak, arrogant, and sick. But tonight, for the first time, I looked at him as a stranger who needed to be interrogated. "Richard," his smile faltered. It had probably been a long time since I used that tone with him. Not the voice of a wife calling her husband at dinner, but the voice used to call a witness to the stand. "Yes, Meg?" I spoke slowly, enunciating every word. "In the 30 years you've lived with me, 20 of those years letting me nurse you like a chronic invalid, Have you ever once felt ashamed in this house? The wind outside rustled the conservatory blinds. The gravy boat stopped, steaming. Oliver put his glass down, his eyes darting between me and his father. Richard frowned, but very quickly forced a laugh. Meg, what are you going on? About, we're having dinner with our son, why bring that up now? I stared at him. He looked at Oliver, then at me, his voice dropping into that patronizing tone reserved for someone overly emotional. Is this because of the health check? Are you letting your imagination run wild again? I told you, those results were botched. You know exactly how I've treated you, Ollie, and this family all these years. Oliver frowned. What health check, Mum? Richard immediately cut in. It's nothing. Your mum hasn't been feeling well. The doctor made an offhand comment and she's just panicked. I watched him hurriedly try to gag the truth, feeling unnaturally serene. He had always been brilliant at smoothing things over. When Oliver was small and Richard missed his parents' evening, he said work was crazy. When I was hospitalized for vertigo and he arrived late, he said he was entertaining clients. For 20 years, he said he was too sick to touch his wife. And I believed him. Richard's color changed. Margaret, please don't discuss private marital issues in front of our son. Why not? I asked. Oliver is my son. He has a right to know how his mother has been living. Oliver sat up straight. Dad, what exactly is going on? Richard slammed his glass down on the table, red wine sloshing over the rim. Nothing is going on. Your mother is emotionally unstable right now. Women at this age get like this. Don't pay any attention to it. Women at this age get like this. That phrase rolled past my ears, cold and filthy. When a man doesn't want to answer, he turns a woman's questions into a symptom of illness. Hormones, age, paranoia, the menopause, any label will do, so long as he doesn't have to open his closet of secrets. I didn't get angry. I simply picked up my water glass and took a sip. The cold water slid down my throat, soothing nothing. I set the glass down and looked right at him. Then let me ask you about something else. My voice was feather-light. Who is Leo? In that second, the fork dropped from Richard's hand and hit the floor. Oliver bent down to pick it up. He didn't put it back on the table. He just gripped it, his knuckles turning white. Dad, who is Leo? Richard blinked rapidly, as if dragging himself out of a severe dizzy spell. Then he laughed, a rigid, distorted sound that was entirely uncharacteristic of him. Which Leo? There are millions of Leos in the world. Who have you been listening to, Margaret? Bringing this nonsense to the dinner table? I stared at him in silence. He spoke faster and faster. Meg, you are really crossing a line now. I've bitten my tongue for days because I thought the doctor had scared you, but you cannot sit in front of our son and fabricate baseless accusations. How am I supposed to know who Leo is? You don't know? I asked. No. The answer shot out, so decisive that had it been 20 years ago, I would have believed him. He had used that exact tone back then to say he was framed, decisive, agonized, pitiful. I had embraced him, sacrificing half my life to a perfectly acted lie. I reached behind my chair into my cardigan pocket and pulled out the burner. Phone. Richard saw the movement, a muscle twitching near his eye. Oliver turned to look at me too. The photo folder was already open. I didn't say another word. I just placed the phone on the table, turning the screen toward the two men. The first photo was Richard standing in the sun outside the Battersea Reach. Apartments. One arm around Chloe, his other hand ruffling Leo's hair. The atmosphere in the room froze solid. Oliver stared at the photo. His face initially registered confusion, which rapidly mutated into pure shock. He picked up the phone and zoomed in on the teenage boy's face. I saw my son's Adam's apple bob with difficulty. The Leo in the photo had a high nose bridge exactly like Richard's. His eyebrows were Richard's. That half smile was Richard's. There are truths that don't require a DNA test. They simply carve themselves. On toi fâché. Richard reached across to snatch the phone, but I pulled it back just in time. Sit still, I said. It was perhaps the first time in 30 years of marriage I had used a tone like that with him, short, cold, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Richard froze, his hand hanging in midair. Oliver looked at his father, his voice hoarse. Dad, who is this woman? And this boy, he's a distant relative. Richard cut in frantically. And Acquaintance asked me to help them out. How does a distant relative look exactly like you? Dad, look at him. Oliver demanded. Don't listen to your mother's delusions. Does it matter if I'm close to their family? I swiped to the second photo. Leo's birthday. The boy stood in front of a cake, with a 19 candle on it. Chloe on one side, Richard on the other. A banner on the fame. The wall read, Happy birthday to our son Leo. Richard's hand rested on the Taenstappen. Boy's shoulder. A radiant smile on his face. A smile I rarely saw at home, and a naughty smile on his face. Unguarded, effortless smile. Oliver swiped to the next photo himself. The beach at Brighton. Richard holding a younger Leo's hand, Chloe walking behind, barefoot in the sand. Another at a theme park, Richard carrying Leo on his shoulders. Another inside the flat, the three of them sitting around a dining table with a spread of food. This wasn't a one-off meeting. It wasn't helping out a distant relative. It was an entire parallel life. Oliver's lips trembled. Tell me, Dad. Richard maintained his desperate facade. Photos can be photoshopped so easily these days. Ollie, you work in tech, you know this. Someone is trying to ruin me. Your mother has been agitated for days, listening to outsiders. I let out a short laugh. The sound was tiny, but it silenced him. Even now, he was blaming me for being brainwashed. He turned to me, his eyes darkening. So what do you want? What's the point of dragging out contextless photos in front of our son? Do you want to destroy this family? This family was destroyed the day you fell to your knees and lied to me, I replied. The color drained from his face. Oliver turned to me. What did he lie about? Moom? I didn't answer Oliver immediately. I opened the audio folder. The first second was static. Then Richard's voice came through the phone's speaker. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and incredibly soft. A voice I thought he only used when he felt guilty toward me. I'll come over this weekend. Remember to buy the chocolate sponge cake he likes. How could I forget my own son's birthday? I looked at Richard. He stood rigid, his lips moving but producing no sound. The recording continued. A woman's voice chimed in, younger than mine, whiny but annoyed. You keep promising. When are you finally going to leave the woman in the quarter house? Then Richard's voice, dropping low, cajoling. Just wait a bit longer. Let me get my retirement payout sorted first. She's used to running everything at home. Ditching her now would just cause a mess. The gravy in the jug had formed a skin. Nobody touched their cutlery. I looked at Oliver's hands resting on the table. They were shaking. From a very young age, my son rarely cried. Children who grow up with a distant father often learn to bury their emotions early. But right now, Oliver's eyes were blazing red. The woman in the house. Oliver repeated the phrase, sounding as if he couldn't believe his own ears. You called Mum that. Richard took a sharp breath and stood up abruptly. It's not what you think. It was just something I said to pacify her. That woman. She gets jealous. She makes a scene. I had to appease her. Calling your mum, the woman in the porta calling your mum. Houses. Stop, Oliver choked out. I opened another text file. There was no need to read it out loud. I just handed the phone to Oliver. The screen showed the fragmented text logs. Chloe reminding him about A-levels. Richard promising to pay tuition. Chloe demanding a holiday. Richard saying, the house is just a duty. You and him are the only place I want to come home to. Oliver read every line, his face ashen. When he reached the bottom, he looked up at his father. Leo is 19. Richard didn't answer. I answered for him. Based on the date of that birthday photo, Leo is 19 this year, meaning that about a year after your father knelt in front of me in the planks, rain, claiming he had caught an infectious disease and could never touch me. Again, that child was born. Oliver looked as if he had been slapped in the face. He turned to Richard, eyes wide. What disease did you say you had? Richard growled. Margaret, do not drag up the past. Why shouldn't I demanded. 20 years ago, you came home soaked, knelt in front of me, and said you had been set up, that you caught a disease you could pass on. You said you could never be intimate with me again because you were terrified of hurting me. I believed you. I pitied you. I slept in a separate room and nursed you like an invalid. I managed everything you ate, drank, and did. And what did you do? You used those 20 years to play husband and father in Another house! My throat choked on the last sentence, but no tears fell. Sometimes the pain is so deep it pulls the tears backwards, freezing you from the inside out. Oliver shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floorboards. The noise was deafening. Dad. Is it true? Richard looked at his son, then at me. In his eyes was panic, rage, and the burfax. Frantic calculation of a man backed into a corner, still desperately searching for a trapdoor. Oli, listen to me. Adult matters are very complicated. Back then, your mother and we were no longer functioning like a normal couple. I am a man, I have needs. I had a moment of weakness. A moment of weakness lasting 20 years? Oliver snarled. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Richard said rapidly. Leo was an HE's loss. Accident. But he's my flesh and blood. I couldn't just abandon him. And your mother? I know she's a kind, sacrificing woman. I thought leaving things as they were would spare everyone the most pain. I looked at him. Even now, he wouldn't apologize. He only said he had a moment of weakness. He only said the child was innocent. He only said I was kind and sacrificing. It turns out that a woman's kindness, in the eyes of a selfish man, is not a virtue to be cherished, but a vulnerability to be exploited. Oliver shook his head. Spare everyone the pain. Who is everyone, Dad? Richard grimaced. Ollie, you're young. You don't understand marriage. When you live together this long, you have to tolerate a lot. I wronged your mother, yes. But I never abandoned this house. I paid the bills. I maintained her status. What has she ever lacked? I stared at him, seeing the core of the man beneath the polished exterior for the first time. In his mind, his responsibility to his wife meant giving her a roof, an allowance, and a title on a piece of paper. The nights she slept alone, the times she suppressed her own need for affection, the suspect herbal drinks, the lies that made her amputate a part of her own life, none of that factored into his calculations. Oliver slammed his hand on the table. You dare say you haven't shirked your responsibilities? Mom spent 20 years caring for you because she thought you were sick. You left her to live like a nun while you had a whole nother family, and you think she's lacking nothing? Richard's temper flared. How dare you speak to me like that? Is this what your mother taught you? He pointed a finger at me. Ever since she came back from that clinic, she's been acting like a lunatic, digging through my things, secretly recording me, playing detective. Now she's dragging our son in to hold a tribunal. What has this house turned into? I didn't reply. The closer he got to a dead end, the more the real Richard showed. I simply watched and memorized it. The phone in my pocket was still recording. Every word he spoke was another brick he was personally throwing at the monument of the good husband he had built for decades. Oliver stepped forward, standing right beside me. Mum didn't drag me into this. I'm standing here myself. If Mum hadn't spoken up today, how long were you going? To let her live in this lie? Richard let out a cold laugh. So what do you two want now? I want you to get on your knees and apologize to her. I want you to leave Chloe and Leo. He is my flesh and blood too. Did you think you were my only son? When those words left his mouth, the room went dead silent. Oliver stood frozen. I saw my son's shoulders tremble. Once certain words leave the mouth, they don't just wound the listener. They sever the speaker's own path back. I stood up slowly. That's enough. Richard glared at me. It's not enough. I have tolerated you for 30 years in this house. You think your sacrifices are so magnificent? You just stayed at home cooking, washing clothes, looking after a kid. I was the one out there, earning the money, maintaining our reputation, carrying the weight of the world. I make one mistake and you act like the sky has fallen. I looked at him and suddenly felt a strong urge to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it had taken 30 years for me to finally hear his honest opinion. Oliver hissed, "Shut up." But Richard didn't shut up. Backed into a corner, looked upon with disgust by his son and stripped of control by me. He didn't apologize. He didn't bow his apologize. Head, he just roared, his face flushed red, slamming his hand onto the table so hard the plates rattled. What right do you have to get high and mighty with me? If it weren't for me, you would just be a useless woman pottering around this house. That sentence dropped onto the dining table, making everything around me bizarrely quiet. If it had been 10 years ago, I might have cried. If it had I been 20 years ago, I would have asked myself what I did wrong to make the man I would loved say such things. But tonight, as Richard pointed his finger at my face and screamed that I was just a useless woman, I didn't feel the pain I expected. The capacity to feel that pain had already been scraped raw by the photos at Battersea Reach and the text message calling me the woman in the house. What remained in me was just a cold void, like a kitchen long after the fires have been put out. Oliver stood next to me, his shoulders rigid. Say that again, I dare you. My son's voice was low. He didn't shout, but every syllable vibrated with rage. Richard turned to Oliver, his face purple. The whine and the shame of being unmasked made his eyes bloodshot. He slammed his hand on the table again, splashing gravy onto the white tablecloth, leaving a creeping brown stain. You want to defend your mother? You better learn right from wrong. I raised you. I paid for your education. And now you stand here shouting at your father. Over some petty female jealousy? Oliver let out a dry, hacking laugh. Jealousy? You conned Mum for 20 years, have a 19-year-old secret son, and fed Mum God knows what every night. And you? Call that jealousy? I told you it was a herbal supplement. Where is the prescription then, eh? Richard stammered for a second. Just 1 second, but it was enough for Oliver to catch it. He stepped forward, leaning both hands on the table, staring right into his father's face. Do you know how Mum lived? Do you know every time I asked why you and Mum didn't sleep in the same room, she told me you were ill, you were suffering, and I had to love you more? Do you know that when I was a kid, I used to think you were the most tragic figure in this house? My eyelids stung at that last sentence. I didn't know Oliver remembered that. I thought he was too young. I thought my words back then had faded like any other comforting lie. It turns out children hear everything, they just don't say it. Richard gritted his teeth. You were a child. What did you know about marriage? Adults have to swallow a lot of things to stay together. I made a mistake with your mother, but I never abandoned this house. I paid the bills, kept up appearances. And her? Sneaking around, investigating, taking photos, recording. Me. Is that what a wife is supposed to do? I looked down, reached into my cardigan pocket, and pulled out my phone. The screen was still running the voice recorder. A tiny red light blinked in that corner. I placed it face up on the table, looking calmly at him. Keep going. I'm listening. The color vanished from Richard's face. He looked at the phone, then at me. Perhaps it was then he realized that his words weren't just vanishing into the air of this room, they were being preserved. A man who had spent his life meticulously managing his image suddenly realized his mask was being recorded as it shattered. Fear instantly laced his anger. He lunged forward to snatch the phone. Oliver reacted faster, blocking his arm. Don't touch her things. Get out of the way, Richard roared. Oliver didn't budge. The two men stood facing each other, barely a foot apart. I could clearly see both fury and agony on Oliver's face. After all, this was his father. A father who was rarely present, but still the man he had waited for at the school gates. The man he wanted to show his perfect exam scores to. The man whose praise he craved. When a person's trust breaks, it doesn't make a loud noise. It just makes their eyes turn red, and they never see the world the same. Way again. I'm going to ask you one last time, Oliver enunciated clearly. Did you ever truly love Mum? Richard froze. I looked at him too. The answer to that question was no longer necessary for me, but for Oliver, perhaps it was the last piece of dignity he wanted to salvage for his mother. If Richard just said yes, if he just bowed his head and offered a decent apology, perhaps my son would still have a corner in his heart to put this father down gently. But Richard didn't do that. He gave a bitter, dismissive sneer. Love? What does it matter? We've lived together for decades, and you're asking childish questions. Your mother got to be my wife. She got the status of a director's wife, a nice house in London. What more did she want from me? Oliver closed his eyes. When he opened them, the look in them was entirely different, so that's a no. Ollie, don't call my name. Oliver took a half step back. You disgust me. Those words ignited the absolute last shred of Richard's fragile ego. He swung his arm. It happened incredibly fast. I only saw the blur of his hand cut through the air, followed by a sharp, cracking slap that echoed in the dining room. Oliver's head whipped to the side, his elbow knocking his wineglass off the table, shattering it into pieces on the floor. I sprang to my feet. "Richard!" He was panting, the hand that had just struck his son still trembling. Perhaps even he hadn't expected to strike him, but instead of remorse, he doubled down on his position as the offended patriarch. "You ungrateful little bastard. I raised you and you stand here berating me? You turn on your own father for a woman?" Oliver slowly turned his head back. 5 angry red marks were blooming on his cheek, but his eyes held no more anger, only a hollow, bottomless disappointment. He looked at Richard and said, very softly, "That woman is my mother." Richard froze. Oliver grabbed a napkin and wiped his slightly split lip. "From today, I do not have a father like you." That sentence plunged the room into silence once again. Richard stared at Oliver, his lips moving. Maybe he wanted to keep shouting. Maybe he wanted to pull him back, but no words came out. Oliver didn't wait. He picked up his phone, grabbed his weekend bag by the sofa, and walked straight to the front door. I wanted to call out to him, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. At the door, Oliver stopped. He turned his head to look at me, the tough exterior cracking just a fraction. "Mum, I'm going out for a bit. Don't be afraid, I'm not abandoning you." I nodded. "I know." The door closed. The heavy thud of the lock engaging sounded like a cleaver, chopping off the last remaining limb of what we called a family. Richard stood in the middle of the dining room, his breathing ragged. The dinner on the table was stone cold. The gravy had congealed, the roast beef looked gray and unappetizing. The expensive bottle of wine he had opened was still half full. Everything laid out for a reunion had become the crime scene of a, quote, permanent fracture. I reached over and stopped the recording on my phone, saving the file. My movements were so mundane that Richard watched me in horror. He stepped forward, his voice suddenly dropping. "Meg." I put the phone in my pocket. "Don't call me that." He stood still for a few seconds. Then, the exact same thing I had witnessed 20 years ago repeated itself. He dropped to his knees. His knees hit the floorboards, his shoulders slumped. The man who had just screamed that I was useless, who had just slapped his own son, looked up at me with red, watery eyes. I was wrong. I was so wrong. "Margaret, give me a chance. I was possessed." "Chloe, she was just a mistake. Leo was born, I couldn't abandon him, but the person I love is you. This house is my real home. Ignore what I said earlier. I was just angry and talking rubbish." I looked down at him, kneeling at my feet. The scene was so identical to that rainy night, it was laughable. The same red eyes, the same hoarse voice, the same man debasing himself to earn forgiveness. But I was no longer that young woman. I had spent 20 years paying the tuition for my naivety. It was far too expensive. I couldn't afford to pay a penny more. "Stand up," I said. He shook his head, even slapping his own cheek once. "No, if you don't forgive me, I won't get up. I know you love me. You have a soft heart. You've looked after me all these years. You wouldn't destroy everything, would you?" I stared down at him. Everything had been destroyed a long time ago. It's just that today, I finally saw the ruins. He reached out to grab the hem of my blouse. I stepped back. That miss was painted clearly across his face. In the past, the moment he showed pain, I would instantly reach out to catch him. Now, looking at that hand, I just felt dirty. "Margaret, I'll cut ties with Chloe. I won't go over there anymore. Leo is grown, I'll just send child support. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. Just don't divorce me. I'm about to make partner. If the extended family, the firm, the neighbors find out, I'll have no face left." Ah. Finally, we arrived at his true terror. Not losing me, not hurting Oliver, not a marriage he had hollowed out for 20 years. What made him tremble was his reputation. I smiled very faintly. "Tomorrow morning, I am seeing my solicitor. We are getting a divorce." His head snapped up. The begging drained from his eyes like the receding tide, revealing the thick mud underneath. "What did you say?" I said, "Divorce." "You're bluffing." "I am not bluffing. I will file the papers, the assets, the evidence, the secret child, the medication in my system, all of it will be handed to my solicitor." He sprang to his feet. The man who had been kneeling a second ago vanished. Before me stood the real Richard, Egotistical, panicked, furious, and fiercely calculating. You think you're so clever? You think there's no shame in divorcing at your age? The family, the firm, everyone will laugh at you. I've lived inside a joke for 20 years already. A few more laughs from outsiders are nothing to be afraid of. He looked at me as if he didn't recognize me. Perhaps in his entire life I had never spoken a sentence he couldn't deflect. He was used to a silent wife, not the woman standing in front of him now. Margaret, don't forget I manage the house and the money. What do you actually know about our finances to demand a divorce? Do you think a few photos will get you anything? I looked at him. At the very least, they'll help me get my life back. He offered a cold, chilling smile, a smile that reminded me of those texts on the old phone. Your life. You've been a housewife for decades. Whose name is on the deeds where the money is kept? You don't even know. If you really want a divorce, I have ways to make sure you walk out of this house with absolutely nothing. I stood perfectly still. The anger didn't flare up again. It settled into a bed of hot, smoldering ash. I had predicted he would say this. Solicitor Hughes had told me, a man like him, when he feels his reputation is lost, will immediately pivot to protecting his money. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice, each word dripping with venom. Listen to me one last time. Keep your mouth shut. We pretend today never happened, and I will let you remain Mrs. Evans in the eyes of the world. But if you divorce me, you won't get a single penny. I didn't stay in that house that night. After Richard threatened to leave me, penniless, I simply went to my room and picked up the overnight bag I had packed the day before. Inside were a few changes of clothes, my passport, copies of the Werglos, house deeds, the USB drive of evidence, my blood pressure pills, and some cash. I walked through the living room. He stood blocking the front door, his face still flushed with anger. Where are you going? To sleep somewhere else. Are you trying to make a scene for the neighbors? I looked him dead in the eye. Move. Perhaps the look in my eyes made him freeze, not because I was intimidating, but because I was no longer afraid. People can only threaten those who still want to hold on to something. But when I had already let go of this house in my heart, he had nothing left to hold over my head. He gritted his teeth but ultimately stepped aside. I called an Uber to the service department Fiona had booked for me. On the way, Oliver called. His voice was thick with emotion, but he tried to stay calm. Mum, where are you? I've left the house. Don't worry about me. I'm coming to you right now. Get some rest, Ollie. Meet me in the solicitor tomorrow. The line went quiet for a long time. Then Oliver said, Mum, I'm so sorry. I looked out the car window. The London streetlights washed over my face in streaks of amber. You have nothing to be sorry for. You didn't do anything. I let you suffer alone for too long. My heart twinged. A child has no obligation to rescue their mother from their roading the mother, parents' marriage, yet he still blamed himself. I exhaled softly. Oliver, from now on, Mum is going to save herself. You just need to stand by me. That's enough? The next morning, I met Solicitor Hughes alongside Fiona at his office. The window overlooked a busy street tangled with bus routes. Hughes listened to the proptits. Recording from last night, looked at the photo of the red marks on Oliver's face and immediately organized the files. He didn't offer any redundant sympathy. His sheer professionalism steadied me. Mrs. Evans, from now on, all communication with Richard must leave a paper trail. No private, unrecorded meetings. Regarding the assets, I've reviewed the copies you provided. The family home is a marital asset. The buy-to-let flat is in his name, but if we prove the mortgage was paid from joint income, we have a strong claim. The same goes for the car. We need to subpoena his savings and investment accounts, but our immediate priority is placing a freeze on any asset transfers. I placed a thick stack of papers on the desk. I found some copies in his filing cabinet. Over the last few days, I took photos of his savings books, life, insurance policies, and the Battersea flat deeds. Fiona looked at me, her eyes softening. Thank God you woke up when you did. I didn't feel clever. I just felt sad. A wife trying to protect herself had to rifle through cabinets and photograph documents like a thief in her own home. But at this point, dignity wasn't about looking proper. Dignity meant not letting the man who deceived me rob me of the rest of my life. Solicitor Hughes drafted a divorce settlement proposal. The terms were uncompromising. I would keep the family home or its equivalent value. The buy-to-let flat would be sold and split, leaning heavily in my favor due to his extreme marital fault and financial misconduct. The car was mine. Savings, insurance, and investments would be divided based on contribution. Given Richard's severe misconduct, Hughes noted, we are demanding a highly favorable split. Furthermore, all evidence of his infidelity, the secret child, his verbal abuse, and the physical violence against your son will be submitted to the court if he refuses to settle. That afternoon, Richard called incessantly. I didn't answer. He switched to texting. At first, it was coaxing. Meg, come home, let's talk. I was hot-headed and spoke out of turn. Then, it turned to blame. You're old. You're listening to outsiders. Do you want Oliver to hate his father? By evening, when Hughes sent the official legal notice, the tone of his texts flipped entirely. You think you're so clever. So you prepared this all along. You just want the money, don't you? I looked at the text and didn't reply. A moment later, he sent another. I think you've got me by the throat? Don't forget I've controlled the finances for years. Fiona was sitting next to me on the sofa in the service department, sipping peppermint tea. She read it and scoffed. This piece of work, right to the vein. Bitter end, he thinks money is a leash. Don't reply. Let the solicitor handle it. But money wasn't the only leash he tried to pull. The following day, a woman showed up at my service department. When the buzzer rang, I checked the intercom screen. Chloe was standing in the corridor. She wore a white dress, her hair tied back, minimal makeup. In person, she looked much more tired than in the Dexit of A. Photos. There were dark circles under her eyes, her lips pressed tightly. Together. Fiona was in the living room. Seeing me stare silently at the screen, she stood up. Who is it, Chloe? Fiona marched over, her face darkening. Do not open that door. I thought differently. If I didn't open it, she would find another way to harass me. Besides, I wanted to see what the woman who had walked beside Richard for nearly 20 years had to say to me. I opened the door, but kept the security chain attached. Chloe looked at me through the gap. Her eyes did a rapid sweep from my face to the clothes I was wearing, clearly assessing how the woman in the house compared to herself. Then she lowered her voice, putting on a very practiced look of pity. Mrs. Evans, please give me a few minutes. I have nothing to say to you. I know I was wrong, but Richard lied to me too. He said you two hadn't loved each other for a long time, that you only stayed together out of duty. I waited for him for nearly 20 years. Leo has grown up never being able to publicly claim his father. If you force him to give up everything now, how are my son and I supposed to live? I listened to her, my heart entirely devoid of ripples. She claimed she was lied to, yet in her texts, she called me the woman in the house. She cried for her and her son's future. Yet in that future, I was to be tossed out like old rubbish. There are pitiable women in this world, but being pitiable doesn't make you blameless. I replied, stating 3 facts clearly. 1. This is between me and Richard. You have no right to beg me to surrender what is fair. 2. Whether he loses everything or not is the consequence of his own actions. 3. I have 0 obligation to fund the future of you and your son. Chloe's face shifted. The soft, begging facade dropped instantly. Don't act so high and mighty. You gotta keep the title of the official wife for decades. What about me? I gave him my youth. I stared at her. You made your choice. You're old. What more do you want? She spat. You have a son, a house, a status. But what about Leo? He is Richard's son too. Fiona couldn't take it anymore and yanked the door as if to slam it, but I stopped her. Right in front of Chloe, I picked up the intercom receiver and called the concierge. Hello. There is an intruder harassing me at apartment 1208. Please send security up immediately. Chloe's eyes widened. You're calling security? I'll call the police if you keep standing there. She bit her lip, her eyes shifting from begging to venomous resentment. I think you've won? Richard doesn't love you. Even if you keep the money, you're just an old woman who is cast aside. I looked at her for a long time. At least from today, I won't have to lie to myself that he loves me. The security guards arrived quickly. Chloe couldn't maintain her dignity and walked away swiftly. Before stepping into the lift, she threw one last sentence over her shoulder. You just wait. I won't let you get away with this. The lift doors closed. Fiona muttered a curse under her breath and turned to me. Richard definitely sent her. He wants two women tearing each other apart so he can stand on the sidelines. I nodded. Then we don't tear at her. We strike directly at him. That evening, Fiona helped me draft an anonymous post on Richard's firm's internal corporate network. No real names, no explicit photos, but just enough precise details. A senior director up for a board position, famous for being a Blanksburg lacket, devoted family man, has actually maintained a mistress for 20 years, has a 19-year-old secret son, and tricked his official wife into living as his celibate nurse for decades. I only allowed the posting of facts we could absolutely prove. The truth was, sharp enough, it didn't need embellishing. The next morning, the corporate network exploded. Fiona had a contact in the firm who reported back. Everyone across every department was gossiping. Even though the post used pseudonyms, the timeline, the job title, the upcoming promotion, and the health issues made it glaringly obvious who it was. By midday, management called Richard in. By the afternoon, news leaked that his highly anticipated promotion to partner had been put on indefinite hold. My phone started buzzing frantically. Richard called, texted, left voicemails. I ignored them all. By evening, he sent a long, threatening message. If you want to ruin my life, I won't let you live in peace either. I will drag you down with me. I took a screenshot, forwarded it to Solicitor Hughes, and replied to Richard with exactly one sentence. If the settlement isn't signed by 12 p.m. tomorrow, the comms dash. Rest of the files will go to the press. At 11:40 a.m. the next day, Solicitor Hughes called me. I was sitting in the service department, a cold cup of tea in front of me. Outside, the sky was gray. Heavy clouds pressing down on the London rooftops. I had done nothing, all morning but wait. Fiona sat next to me, flipping through a magazine but hadn't turned a page in an hour. Oliver had arrived early, sitting quietly at the bay dining table, reviewing the legal files, occasionally looking up at me as if terrified I might break. The phone rang. I answered. Hughes's voice was as steady as ever. Mrs. Evans, Richard has agreed to sign. He accepts all the primary terms. We are scheduled at the notary office this afternoon to execute the financial blank separation, followed by the formal divorce filings. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel joyous. I didn't burst into tears. I just felt aplasted. Rope that had been tightening around my neck for 20 years suddenly loose in a fraction. It turns out that when you can finally breathe again, you don't necessarily cry. Sometimes you just sit perfectly still, feeling the weight lift from your chest ounce by ounce. Fiona put the magazine down. He signed? I nodded. Oliver walked over and crouched in front of me, just like he did when he was a black shin. Little boy, are you okay, Mum? I looked at my son. The red marks on his cheek had faded, but in his eyes, a deeper scar remained. I reached out and gently touched his face. I'm okay. From today, I'll be much better. That afternoon, I saw Richard again at the solicitor's office. He wore a gray shirt, his hair unkempt, looking visibly aged in just a few days. The bags under his eyes sagged, the corners of his mouth drooped. The composed, respectable aura that had fooled so many was now just a crumpled, dirty rag. He looked at me as I walked in. His eyes were a chaotic mix of hatred, pleading, humiliation, and bitter reluctance. I sat opposite him. Solicitor Hughes laid the documents on the table. The terms were clear. I kept the family house and the car. The Battersea flat was to be sold, with the vast majority of the equity going to me due to his marital fault and financial deception. The savings, insurance, and investments were heavily divided in my 2020 favor. Richard kept just enough to avoid absolute destitution, but compared to the empire he had tried to hide, it was a total defeat. He held the pen, his hand shaking slightly. Before signing, he looked at me. Meg, are you truly this ruthless? I stared at the dotted line on the paper, not at his face. I just learned from you how to calculate what's mine. He choked. A moment later, the nib touched the paper. Every stroke was violently aggressive, as if trying to pierce through the desk. I signed after him. My handwriting wasn't as elegant as it used to be, but it was straight and decisive. When I set the pen down, I knew that a 30-year marriage hadn't ended with screams or tears, but with the dry scratch of a pen in a sterile office. On the day the decree absolute arrived, a light drizzle was falling. I walked out of the courts, holding the plastic-sleeved folder. Richard walked a few ten paces behind me. Neither of us spoke a word. The rain fell on my hair, cold but cleansing. I didn't open my umbrella. Oliver was waiting for me across the street, holding an umbrella. Seeing me approach, he opened it and held it over my head. "Let's go home, Mum." I turned my head. Richard was still standing under the awning of the building, a prowler, solitary, lost figure. He looked as if he wanted to call out to me, but stayed silent. Perhaps he finally understood that this time, even if he fell to his knees, no one would run back to catch him. Later, news about Richard reached me in fragmented whispers. When Chloe realized he had lost the lion's share of his assets and his prestigious promotion, she threw a monumental fit. She demanded he marry her, transfer a property to her, and secure Leo's future. When she realized he was no longer capable of giving her what she had waited 20 years for, she took Leo and left London. Some said she went back up north. Some said she moved to another city. I didn't care to ask. At his firm, Richard was moved to a nominal, powerless role and eventually took early retirement. His extended family initially called to scold me for being too harsh, but when they heard about the 19-year-old secret son and the recording of him degrading his wife, they fell dead silent. People are strange. When the truth is murky, they tell women to endure. When the truth is exposed as utterly vile, they rush to distance themselves so they don't get dirty. I sold the old house. On moving day, I stood in the empty living room looking at the wall where the family portrait used to hang. Without the frame, there was a patch of paint noticeably lighter than the rest of the wall. Just like my life. Some things you think you've removed completely, but the shadow remains. I didn't try to scrub it. Some marks you just have to leave behind. I bought a smaller, quieter flat in a leafy suburb. The balcony caught the common afternoon sun. It wasn't massive or luxurious, but everything in it was chosen by me. A cream linen sofa, a round dining table for two, a few pots of English, ivy and lavender on the balcony. I put the remaining settlement money into a high-yield savings account and gave a portion to Oliver as seed money for a tech startup he had been dreaming of. Oliver refused at first. I simply told him, "This isn't your father's money. This is the portion of my life I claimed back. I want to use it for something decent." He hugged me for a very long time, his shoulders shaking. But this time I didn't feel my heart breaking. I felt warm. A month later, Fiona dragged me to Cornwall. She said I needed a change of scenery, needed to look at the ocean instead of divorce papers. We took the Manaman train, ate Cornish pasties in a tiny bakery, drank hot tea on the harbor, and wandered along the rugged cliffs. On our last morning, I walked into a small local salon. "Cut it short," I told the hairdresser. "How short, love?" she asked. I looked at myself in the mirror. My long hair had followed me for over half my crade life. Richard used to say women should keep their hair long to look gentle. I touched the ends. Suddenly, they felt incredibly heavy. A bob, just to the bursons. Shoulders. As the locks of hair fell to the tiled floor, it didn't hurt. It just felt light. Fiona sat behind me, her eyes a bit red, but grinning widely. "Looks gorgeous. You look 10 years younger." I smiled, too. The woman in the mirror was a stranger. Short hair, a thin neck, eyes that still showed signs of fatigue but no longer looked down. I hadn't returned to my youth. I had merely handed myself back the right to start over. Back in London, I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the local community center. On the first day, my hand was clumsy. The blue paint bled outside the outline of the mountains. The instructor gently corrected me, laughing and saying everyone struggles at first. I looked at the smear of color on the thick paper, feeling an unexpected, profound peace. It turns out that after half a lifetime of cooking for someone else, these hands could still learn how to paint a sky of their own. That afternoon, I returned to my new flat. Oliver had ordered a small potted bougainvillea to be delivered to my balcony. The late-day sun spilled across the play. Wooden floorboards golden, warm, and clean. I opened the window. A breeze blew in. carrying the scent of damp earth after a shower and the sound of children laughing in the courtyard below. I stood there for a very long time. There was no Richard calling me to make his tea. There was no pale yellow supplement on the table. There was no locked study door. There was only my small flat, my sky, and the rest of my life, which, finally, belonged entirely to me. I watched the sunlight flood the room and whispered to myself, from today, live for me. There are marriages that look perfectly tranquil from the outside, but inside, they are sustained by the silent, agonizing endurance of one person. Kindness, if placed in the right hands, is a blessing. But if given to the wrong person, it becomes a rope that binds you to suffering. The most valuable trait in a woman isn't the ability to endure to the bitter end, but the clarity to wake up one day and realize she deserves to be respected, loved, and to live truthfully for herself. The mistakes of another should never become a life sentence for you. To forgive or to leave, to stay silent or to speak out, every choice requires immense courage. If you were in this situation, what would you choose? Please, leave your thoughts in the comments section below. And if this story touched you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue hearing more deeply emotional real-life stories.